live in the Finger Lakes One TV studio today with a couple of special guests who will be revealed about halfway through the show. We're in a hurry here because we've got a couple of great interviews we want to share with you. What I want to tell you is this week's episode is about people who are living their passion through their platform. And if you don't know me, you're not familiar with why I'm here to tell you these stories, feel free to watch This Week on Weber, learn a little bit more about my background and why we're here. In the meantime, we're going to transition right into a couple of segments on a particular woman who is making the world a better place out there with her business called Tapestries, Arianna Ross, who's the executive director. And then I'm going to introduce my friend Kevin Miller from WCNY, who is another man making a difference out there in the world. All right, everybody, we're here today with our beautiful guest, Arianna Ross, correct?
Yes.
And she is here today to be featured for our Women Who Make the World a Better Place segment on what has evolved into a series on people who are using their platform to live their passion. And so Arianna and I just connected on social media because of our mutual acquaintance slash family slash friend. She has an employee in her organization who's the daughter of good friends of mine who've become family over the years here in Seneca Falls. In fact, we featured them with part of Arianna's business, Tapestries, on our last podcast, telling the story about Catherine Switzer and 261 Fearless. And so today we're here to get to know Arianna, get to know Tapestries, and how she's using this platform to do her work in this world and what in particular she loves about it. So I'm so super thrilled to have you here, Arianna. Thank you for taking the time out of your day.
And thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it. It's an honor.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I just, when I started to scroll through all of the different stories and all of the work that you pulled together, I was like, I have to know this woman. So that's what I want to do first, just get to know you a little bit better. So if you would share a little bit about yourself and you know, what makes you you?
I always start with my grandmother, because I think to me, your ancestors and your roots makes a difference in who you end up being. And my mother's mother, I apologize, I didn't realize there was volume on. Sorry. But, my mother's mother was, she had this way of telling stories and listening to stories all the time. My mother's a musician, and my father is a lawyer. But my mother's mother, Elsie Deitch, she just had this way of telling stories and helping me to feel empowered by my own voice. So, and to know that my voice was as important as an adult's voice as a child. And that even though, you know, if something was happening in my house, I knew if I called or talked to my grandmother, she would really listen.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just listening with her ears, she listened with her whole body. And I think that is really what, for me, became sort of the crux and the heart of storytelling. Is that when I went to college, I thought, I'm going to be a theater director on Broadway. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And I did do those things. I didn't do Broadway. I did DC theater. But still, it wasn't a right fit. It wasn't a right marriage. I was like, all right, I'll do storytelling. I did storytelling in college. I'll do storytelling. So I started telling stories and performing for kids and working with teachers and crafting the idea that lessons or math and social studies and English can be taught using the arts, which we call arts integration. Okay. But it still felt like I was sort of doing something, but not enough.
Yeah.
And so then I started going, all right, well, let me apply for grants. Let me do this. And I remember when I met Lorraine Beals and I first hired her, I actually hired her as my administrative assistant. Help me with my scheduling and my organizing. And I was like, I don't know if we're going to go the route of the not-for-profit. It's a lot of work. And I'm not sure I want that. And it really is a lot of work. I tell any new person, be prepared.
Yeah.
But soon people said to me, you know, you're doing what you do every single day the same way you would do it if you were not for profit. But the difference is you can't apply for grants by yourself. You can't get funding by yourself. So I became a not-for-profit very quickly. Most people take a really long time. I got approved by the IRS like that. It was crazy. We were approved within, I think we figured out, we submitted in December. We got our approval in April.
And what year was this?
This was 2006 we submitted. We got our approval in 2007. So it was really fast.
Yeah.
But the minute we got our approval, everything sort of came together. It was as though all the tools that I'd spent time doing, the theater, the dance, the photography, the collage work, the community engagement, the education stuff, all seemed to do this, and doors seemed to fly open. And I was like, wait, hold on, you want to meet with me now? But when I was an artist, you didn't want to, and so it was strange. I was like, wait, you didn't want to meet with me before? And someone was like, oh, it's because you're an executive director now. But I realized years later that that really wasn't the title.
Yeah.
It was that I was finally in the right spot doing what I was supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
And so the minute I was doing it the way I was supposed to be doing, using all of my talents and all of my tools, not just one side or one element, the doors flew wide open.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say it's not a pain in the tushy to be a not-for-profit. I mean, there are days when I go, what was I thinking? You know, the paperwork and this. But then you have days when you see teachers like this morning and they walk away and they're like, yes, oh my gosh, yes, I can totally see it. I totally see why when a child is in your room, Arianna, their whole face lights up. They feel like you're listening to them. They feel like their class learning is happening at a deeper, greater level than if you just handed them a book and said, go read it.
Yeah. So I have to reflect back on something here. You essentially just answered all of the questions.
Oh, no.
In one answer, because here's what becomes entirely clear. Like, you are your work. Like, you're a living expression of your work. Right. And so one of the things that I love talking about is when people are living their purpose on this planet. Right. And it's exactly what you just talked about. Like, everything lining up and getting behind you for that like moment where IRS says, okay, it's a go, you're all set. And all the resources are lined up. Everything's ready to go because you stepped into your purpose.
Right.
Which is beautiful. So when I said to you, tell me a little bit more about yourself, you really like evolved it right into the story of Story Tapestries, but it's you, and that's beautiful. So, you know, in addition to your grandmother and the roots of where all of this came from, I want to know what keeps you, and, you know, besides the teachers and the people who are giving you the feedback, what keeps you inspired? Like, do you have any particular mentors? Are there any particular things you live by and things that really are meaningful for you? And would you share some of that with our audience?
Absolutely. One of my very first arts integration, I put arts integration in quotes because there's many different definitions of what arts integration means. Okay. The idea being that you have the curriculum or whatever the goals are, and then you have arts goals being met at the same time. Mm-hmm. So I can teach you math, like algebra, and I'm also teaching you how to draw at the same time. Okay. And therefore you have a deeper level of engagement. So one of my very first arts integration projects was really examining unsung heroes with a group of kids. So I always like to say there's the unsung heroes. They're the ones that don't get named very often, that I think have influenced me as much as the people that everybody knows about in sort of the education and in the story world. So there's the Rosalind Flynn, which for you may be a name that's just a name, but for me, it's a woman who I still remember when I was teaching, and I didn't have my not-for-profit, and I was working with the Washington Performing Arts. She was the very first consultant to observe me in action. And she was like, you have talent, but you need to try to look at it from this perspective. And you need to scaffold your lesson like this. And you need to do it like this. And she did it in a genuine, giving, like, hold me up way, so that I never felt like she was doing this.
Right.
Which technically was her job. Her job was to tell me who's doing it right and who's doing it wrong. Right. And because of Rosalind, I always feel like I was placed in the right space. And because of her, I ended up being a teaching artist and for the DC Community Partnership Program at the Kennedy Center. And yes, I do have to say that really long title.
Right.
There are other partnerships, and so you have to put the one that you're in.
Right.
But that is really important, is because of her, she recommended me. And because of her, like, all these other pieces came into play. So there's those people, and Michael D. McCarty and Linda Gorham, who are both amazing storytellers based out of California and Chicago. And the two of them, the first time I met them, I was 21 years old, didn't have a clue what storytelling meant, what education meant, what any of that meant. And the two of them sort of put their arm around me and were like, all right, Arianna, we're going to show you this way. We're going to show you that way. And to this day, if I have an issue, I can call any of those individuals and say, hey, help. Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, the mentoring, the support, right?
But then as an executive director, when I became an executive director, I suddenly felt this, like, flailing. I was like, oh my God, I don't know anybody who does this. And then in the process of that, I've had people like Michael Griffin, who's our current board president, who has been really sort of a business mentor. Arianna, you need to look at doing this, and this is how you fundraise, and look at it from this perspective. And then there's a female executive director, Tracy, who runs an organization in Florida called Mitchley Puppets. I highly recommend. She's amazing. And Michael introduced me to her, and she meets with me monthly now.
Oh, wow.
And monthly via Skype. And she gives me advice on how to approach it like this, and I should look at that. And on days when I'm stressed and pulling my hair out, I'm like, Tracy, what was I thinking? And she's like, hold on, take a deep breath. Like, tell me what's going on. And she's a really amazing sort of person who understands what it's like to be a female executive director, which is different than a male executive director. And that, honestly, there are times in which we like to say that the world no longer treats women executive directors differently, and that's not true at all. And there are times in which I have stood in a room and been like, I am the only female in here advocating. And I am the only female looking at cultural appropriation. And I'm the only individual in this room honoring the fact that although I grew up in a community where I was not considered white, because I'm Russian Jewish, but I am definitely not brown. And yet I advocate for children and adults and communities, and I'm all about empowering those communities to find their own voice and to see how I can support them. And that's where I think also the unsung heroes, like, I can't tell you how many times I go into a community and I meet an abuela, or I meet a granny, or I meet a mom or a teacher or a child, and I'm blown over by what they could do if they were handed the right tools, or what they want to do. And then when you start to give them the tools, or you start to simply listen to them, like, they don't need tools, they just need someone to go, yes, you're totally right.
Right.
Like, what you think is correct.
And validate, yeah.
Valid. And so some of those women whose names I don't even really know, and some of those young men whose names I don't necessarily remember, and not because out of disrespect, but because I see so many of them, they, to me, are incredible. The janitors who, when you walk into a space, no matter what, keep a space spotless. even when, to be honest, the environments they're in are pretty horrible.
Yes.
And we're really, Story Tapestries is really about working with communities about empowered community development. You know, creating self-sustaining environments. So not being dictatorial about it, not coming in and being like, this is what you should do. And being like, okay, what do you need? How can I help you? So our vehicle, and I think this is really important, our vehicle is the arts. However, what we really feel is the arts are like the keystone, but you have to have other parts of the bridge in order for a community to be successful. So you need the financial literacy programs. You need social and emotional development issues, conflict resolution. You need strong schools, strong libraries, strong after-school programs. And so how can we weave all of those together to create something that catches individuals as they are falling? Because everybody in life falls and everybody in life fails. So to assume that we're not going to fail is, in my opinion, foolish, because we're going to fail. But then the point is, how can you catch them as they fall and help them grow? We call it in the education world growth mindset versus fixed mindset.
Right. Well, and I also love metaphorically like how much this just together, right? Because you're talking about a very rich community fabric, right? Where everything is pulled together to be that net.
Yep.
Support. So it's beautiful.
And I think sometimes, like, I was talking recently with someone about, you know, the elders that come, the immigrants that come over here, walking, flying, legally, whatever you want to put, whatever box they come in. One of the biggest problems we see is that their story is being taken from them. Their own cultural story that they bring with them is being stolen from them and told that's not valid. You want to ignore that story. You want to learn X story. And I think what's important is to say, okay, yes, you can learn X story in your community. Learn how to function, learn English, learn all those pieces. But don't forget your historical story, your roots, because that story is what is going to hold you up on long nights. That story is what's going to drive you and what's going to root your children. And where people talk about, oh, there's issues of respect and blah, blah, blah in our school system. Part of it is those kids don't know their story.
Right.
And they don't know whether or not their story is important because they've been told more often than not that their story isn't important.
Right. You just spoke right to my heart, because one of my favorite quotes, and it's one that is really coming up right now, is from Brene Brown: owning your story is the bravest thing you'll ever do. But how can you own it if you're not allowed to claim it?
Yeah.
So that's like yet another layer of, I think one of the most impacting articles I ever read was when I first went off to college, and I read Unpacking White Privilege by, I think it's Peggy McIntyre. And that's just one more layer that's sort of built into that, right? So that's beautiful, and I so appreciate that.
And I think it's also important is sometimes I talk to people about, like, I acknowledge my privilege. Like, I know that I can walk in and I can pass for certain places and spaces, and I have no issues and no problems at all. But I know other children, there is no passing. They can't change their face. They can't change their voice. And so it's, how do you take hold of your story, honor it, and also at the same time use your story as, I don't know what, I can't think of the word right now, but as a tool to demonstrate, explain, clarify, heighten, empower, so that others don't step on you in the process. Because so many times we're stepping on our youth and our communities in the process of, quote unquote, rising up and making good. Doesn't mean that I always make a whole lot of money in the process, but you know, as my husband says, are we feeding the community today with this job, or are we feeding our family? And I'm like, we're doing both.
Yes. It's true. It's true, right? It's that world of learning where energy is flowing, right? Because money is that energetic transaction, right? But at the same time, you have to have some of that energetic transaction to go to the grocery store and, you know, take care of the bills and all that kind of stuff.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Unfortunately, we do not live in I live in a small townhouse in a suburb. We do not live in a self-sustaining environment where I can be like, yes. I once stayed with this artist. We did a retreat at this woman's house, and she had a garden full of food, and solar energy and well water and rainwater. I was in awe. I was like, so pretty much. She's like, yep, I own my land. I could live on my land. I wouldn't need to make a dime.
Yeah. Well, I'm inspired by that as well. Right down the road from here, one of my good friends, Tommy Dalton, he has set his mother's homestead up that way, right? So he put in solar panels and a lot of them, because you need a lot of them to be able to do solar work here. And you know, and she's got a what is it? It's not a wood burning stove, but I forget what it's called. See, I told you, flashcards. After you have kids, when you're getting ready to have kids, you need flashcards. But anyways, she's got a self-sustaining environment, and it's literally right down the road. And I love the idea, and that more people are moving in that direction. But you know, not everyone can live that way, right? So part of what I love to do is to be able to shine the light on organizations like yours, because even if it moves one person in some small way to make a donation or to get involved or to be helpful or to be of use to you, then I've done something, right? Then I've done something to impact. So I want to just thank you for all of the amazing work that you do. I hope that this is just the beginning of, you know, opening up a space for connection, because some of the things that you talked about here today literally gave me goosebumps in terms of my own life's journey. Like, you know, talking about things like how you really have a lot of love for the unsung heroes. I think right before we started recording, I shared with you that I feel like what I love to shine the light on is what I refer to as our everyday heroes, right? It's like, maybe you don't know these names yet, or maybe you never will, but they're doing amazing work to make a difference in our community, in our world, and in the world around us. So there's more conversations to be had than our segment here today for this podcast, and I hope this is just the beginning. So.
Thank you so much. Can I add one thing that you said that made me think of something really brief? Just simply the fact that you said, you know, move someone to make a donation. Something I always like to say to people also is, if you're listening to this, that a donation doesn't have to be $1. Doesn't have to be money, because some people don't have that, and that's okay. It can be, because we're an organization that values people across the nation. We have volunteers who help us literally all over the place. Like, we have an employee in Italy. Lorraine is in Italy. We have people who live all over the country who volunteer, who help us to do things. And that, I think, is equally as important. So thinking about what a donation means to you is, if you hear about a not-for-profit on one of your podcasts, if someone's like, ooh, I like that, but I can't do that. I don't have the time. I'm a mom, I'm a single parent, I'm a this, I'm a that. Sometimes there are ways in which you can donate or help that has nothing to do with the dollars in your pocket. You don't have to leave your home in order to help an organization. And there are plenty of organizations like mine that really, use that help.
Yeah. Well, your organization speaks to me, so you can add me to your volunteer list.
Ooh, I will definitely talk to you about that.
Awesome. I love it. Well, I'm going to let you get back to your husband and your daughter, who are waiting for you for your evening journey. And they have successfully bargained with you to get you to go do things you don't want to do. That's where you really stole my heart. This is a woman, ladies and gentlemen, who does not like to shop, just like me.
But I'm going to see Spider-Man with my daughter.
Yes, in exchange. So I love it. So thank you, Arianna. You shared a
Thank
little
you.
bit of your business, your life, your passion, your purpose, and a little bit of you. And I know that it's going to touch somebody out there watching. So thank you again, and I'll be sure to reach out and talk to you soon.
Absolutely.
All right.
Hugs and thanks.
Thank you.
Well, there you have it, everybody. Arianna Ross, Executive Director of Story Tapestries. Go ahead and find their page on Facebook, Story Tapestries, and like them. Follow what they're doing. Absolutely incredible work. And as you can see, Arianna is a beautiful soul, really, truly making a difference out there in the world. And now, moving on in our episode on people who are living their passion through their platform, we're going to transition into an interview with Kevin Miller, who is director and producer, WCNY. So you can go to WCNY.org to check out a lot of their programming. But Kevin and I met over a Cycle of Health episode where I was able to share my story and my journey with celiac disease. We were talking about the diseases and the hidden diseases in our food. So we won't be talking about that today, but when that episode comes out, I'll be sure to share it with you. And in the meantime, here's Kevin Miller. All right, everybody, we're here tonight with Kevin Miller, who is going to be featured on our podcast that's all about people who are sort of living their passion through their platforms. And Kevin is a producer and director with WCNY, and I had the pleasure of meeting him during the filming of an episode of Cycle of Health, which is a feature that they do, and I'll let Kevin share a little bit more about that. But before that, Kevin, I just want to thank you so much for being available for this interview, and I would love if you'd share with our audience a little bit about what you do, and perhaps just a few quick facts about the background of WCNY.
Yeah, so first off, with WCNY, we serve 19 counties, which is really tremendous.
Amazing.
Have the opportunity to, tell all these stories from, Oneonta to Syracuse to Seneca County and beyond. It's really a privilege and an opportunity to get that. But what I do is I'm a television producer. I have the opportunity to look at cycle of health and insight work. More specifically for the cycle of health, that is such a wonderful show where we really tell these amazing stories of health and wellness and recovery. I mean, the stories that we hear from people are just so mind-boggling, insane, and yet they somehow always have this courage and just amazing just fortitude to just persevere through all of their health challenges. And it's really inspirational, especially as someone who is behind the camera like myself, and to really get a feel for just a taste of what these people had to deal with in order to overcome anything like cancer or obesity, anything like that. It's just so wonderful to have the opportunity to, open up doors and tell stories and share them with our viewers.
Yeah, I love that. And I can almost feel that, like, as I'm thinking about the concept, right? I muted myself out for a moment because you can hear now it's starting to play. This is the joy of the home studio. But I can almost, picture you behind the camera, really just able to listen and take it in. Now, of course, you're taking in all different kinds of information, too, because you're doing your
Right.
job while you're there and you're at it. But going back and reviewing and watching it again, I'm sure you just continuously get re-inspired by people's stories.
Yeah, I really do. I really, really do.
Yeah, I mean, could you share with us maybe like a particular episode recently or a particular segment or interview that really hit home for you or really moved you in some way?
Yeah, actually, really, really recently, just this past Thursday, we did a show on keeping safe in central New York. And, we had the opportunity to go down to Binghamton and speak with a woman named Frances who just unknowingly had a tick on her back. And it went for, weeks without knowing. And then she found out about the tick, but there was no tests coming back from her from doctors saying you have Lyme disease. So her health kept on getting worse. And yet when she was getting tested, time and time again for things like Lyme disease, doctors just shrugged it off and said, oh, you must have the flu, you must have this, you must have that, maybe it's food poisoning. But just to see how far someone can fall with Lyme disease, because it's not something that you can easily just, there's no magic pill for it. It's something that is for many people a lifetime struggle. But to see her bounce back and still do the things that she loves. She loves to train dogs. She has a love for the outdoors. So while she cannot do 100% of the things that she wants to do, she can do almost everything. And to see her bounce back in such a way is really just awe-inspiring. And like you said, when I'm behind the camera, I'm taking all this information in. There's the technical side of it, but then there's also the story side of it. And when you're hearing these people just pour out their heart into a situation that they were in, I mean, you really do get caught up in that moment where you feel like, like you're almost like in their shoes. You can almost imagine it. Like, oh my goodness, like what if this happened to me? What if I was outdoors and didn't know I had to take on impact? But to see these people really just come back and, I also talk about stories of hope too when it comes to cycle of health, because there's always this sense of hope. And, you can really get that from someone like her, someone who really wasn't in the depths and now she's really fighting back and she's just having a wonderful time now.
I'm sure that's also going to be really helpful to a lot of viewers too, because so many people suffer with these sort of invisible illnesses, right? And so do you know approximately when that particular episode will air?
Actually, it just aired this Thursday. It aired yesterday. So that was the 6th of July. So, feel free to go online, WCNY.org, Cycle of Health, and you can stream it right there.
Okay, fantastic. So switching a little bit from, WCNY and the work that you're doing, Kevin, will you tell me a little bit about your background and how you ended up on this path?
Yeah, so it's kind of weird, but when I graduated from high school, I was a big music guy. I played piano, I wrote music. Anything when it came to music, I was just all over it. I wake up every day and write songs. But then I became, honestly, a little bit of a punk, and I started not taking college very seriously. And then I just found myself in these dead-end jobs, whether it be the restaurant business or customer service jobs. And, I didn't want to be that person just going from job to job with no true future. So my wife, who is just an amazing person, when she moved up into the Syracuse region, I just came up there as well and found a job over at Krause Hospital. And, that was a great experience for me, but I still wanted more. So I decided to take that leap of faith and go back to school. And, when I was picking out what I wanted to major in, I didn't just want to pick a job that, was just a job. Like I wanted something more than that, because I that's what I've done this whole time, was just do jobs. And I wanted to essentially have fun at my place of work. So I chose to go into electronic media communications, which is what the technical name of it is over at Onondaga Community College. And I took a chance, and I instantly fell in love with the program. And 2 years later, I was lucky enough to find a job at WCNY.
That's amazing. I love that story because it's a story of resilience. It's a story of recreating yourself. And just a couple of podcasts ago, we had a guest on named Alexis Pierce. And if you've never had a chance to meet Alexis, she lives in the Finger Lakes region. I think now she's actually located in Syracuse. But her purpose, her mission in life is really to help people find their soul's purpose. So I, like you, took a couple of different twists and turns before I found my way to what I'm doing now. And I just think how amazing it is to have somebody like her to help people do that. But it's also even more amazing when we find it ourselves, right?
Yeah,
It's
totally.
incredible journey. So I'm really glad that you were able to get on tonight. One of the things I want to point out to our viewers is that WCNY is member supported, right? Nonprofit organization. And so it's really wonderful to go and check out what this organization is doing and how it works throughout our community. I was looking at some of the programming that you guys have today, and it's really incredible. I mean, all of the different stories of what's going on in various communities in terms of poverty. You know, you cover so many different topics, but things that are very real and tangible to everyday life.
Yes.
Right? So for people to get out and check that out, knowing that within the organization, you have people like you who are behind the camera, who are behind the scenes doing the work, knowing how much passion is being poured into the work. So that's really what I'm hoping reaches our viewers. Is there anything else that you'd like to add to that, Kevin?
No, I mean, I think, I think the word passion, shouldn't be thrown around lightly. I mean, I think it's just, you talked about how we do shows based on poverty or different things like health. We definitely want to do our best as people that are out there delivering content to our viewers. We want to make sure that we are not only educating them, but we are inspiring them and also entertaining them and really giving them that perspective that perhaps they wouldn't get in, a news package or anything like that. And we really want to get to know the people that we're going to spend time with, in front of the camera, and to really tell a full and very inspirational story.
And I will tell you that obviously that perspective completely landed on me in our first interaction. So thank you for that. It was very clear to me when you came to do our Cycle of Health episode that this is so much more than a job to you. So just thank you for being you. I can't wait to meet your wife sometime. She sounds amazing. And hopefully we'll get a chance to connect again soon. Thank you, Kevin, for joining us today.
The pleasure's all mine. Thank you so much.
All right, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed the opportunity to learn a little bit more about Kevin Miller from WCNY. You can go to WCNY.org and learn more about the programming that they're putting out there in the community, serving so many counties across the state of New York. And also keep in mind that WCNY is member funded, right? So donations is how it happens. You want to see more programming? Donate some money towards their cause. That'd be a great thing. Next, we're going to be talking about an author and an illustrator that I met out and about in our community. We're going to be meeting our two guests in studio today. And before we do that, I just want to preface how this happened. So previously on a podcast, we had Maureen Angadi on talking about the Finger Lakes Charter School. And from that podcast, James Delaney, or Jim, reached out and said, hey, I want to share something with you. And he shared a series of books that he's written and his friend Chris has illustrated. And so they're here today to talk to us a little bit about the process and also some things that you can do to meet the characters in this series. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Jim Delaney and Chris Madden. Hi, guys.
Hi, Melissa.
Hi, Melissa. How are you?
Thank you so much for coming into the studio today.
Well, thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks.
Absolutely, absolutely. I love the sort of organic evolution of what these podcasts produce in terms of bringing out more people who are truly living their passion through their platform. Jim, I know you and I have talked at great length about the process of writing this series, which I'm going to hold up for you guys here. This is the Hogarth Saga. I've got 4 here in the series, and we're going to talk about how this came to be. But literally, this series has taken over a decade to come to light, and the process has been very different for each book in the series. But Jim is a very interesting person who has a background that is not in writing, and I would like you to just introduce yourself and share your background a little bit, Jim.
Well, I did my undergraduate work not too far from this studio. It was at Eisenhower College. I got a degree in literature and in philosophy. Then a few years after graduating there, I went to Syracuse University, was studying philosophy at the graduate level, and I went over into something called Information Resource Management from the School of Information Sciences there. While getting my degree there, I got a job at a software company in Syracuse, and I was working there after part-time getting my degree, and then full-time after I finished my coursework. And 6 months after that, I got laid off, along with a third of the company. And I thought, that's no big deal. I've got a degree. I have some practical experience. I sent out 150, 200 resumes. I got about 5 interviews. So one day I was at home. I had the stereo on. I think it was an Elvis Costello song I was listening to. I don't remember which one. And feeling sorry for myself because I was out of work. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, this story came to me. And I have no idea where it came from.
It just spilled out.
Yeah. People would mention, the name of the character, and they said, where did that come from? And I said, I have no idea. I was familiar with the English artist William Hogarth in the 18th century, but I only recall that after I had come up with this, and it just seemed to fit. And this was a little sort of fun morality tale. It was written in a half hour. And that's the origin of this, but I originally saw it as a standalone piece.
And you've since gone on to write 3 more in the series.
Yes, and that was, when that happened, that was in the early 90s, and I would say, I think it was in 2005, I started this series of poetry readings at the Killeleagh Museum. At the time I was on the board there, and it was also was a way to also promote the Writer's Voice program at the Auburn, which I head up. And so I read this at the fall poetry reading, and I thought, it's appropriate because it's close to Halloween, it's kind of spooky.
Mm-hmm.
And I was going to read, we were going to have another reading the next fall, and I thought I'd read that again, but then I thought, I don't want to read the same thing again. So I thought, I'll write a follow-up. And I thought, well, what would that be? And I thought, okay, he does these bad things. So the next logical thing was that he gets caught and he's put on trial. So the first one took me about a half hour. The next one took me about 3 weeks to write. And by that time, I thought I've got a whole series, a story arc. So for the next year that I wrote, I thought, well, what happens to him then? I thought, well, he's sent away to this home for wayward boys, St. Alba's Home for Excitable Boys. I came up with that name. And these nasty things happened to him there, electroshock therapy, all these things. And that took me about 3 or 4 months to write. And so for the next one, I thought, okay, I think that'll be the culmination of the story arc. And I imagine him several years into the future. So I was originally writing him as a guy like maybe in his 60s, and he has this sort of, some of his past is catching up with him. And I worked on that for several months, and I would write a few pages, and then the next day, when I looked at it, I'd cross it out. And shall I tell the story about how this came
absolutely.
to me? Okay. Well, so I've been working on this for a few months, getting nowhere. And then I was going over to meet up with a pal of mine to go for a run at Beaver Lake. And we were going to meet some of the guys out in Armory Square. And I was halfway to his house, and it came to me. The first couple of stanzas came to me complete, as if they had just been there, and I happened to open a door in my mind, and there the manuscripts were. And but more frighteningly, because I was driving, the images came to me. And they came in such a flash that I actually couldn't see while I was driving.
Which is scary.
Yes, yeah, and there was really no place to pull over, so I kept trying to force this out of my head. And it kept coming back. And eventually I got so I could get over to my buddy's house, and I got to the door. I said, "Hey, Rich, it came to me." And he said, "Do you want to write it down?" And I was just so arrogant. And I said, "No, I'll remember it." And
I still can't believe that.
No, I know, which is a really bad move, but I did remember it. So But then it took me. That was in the summer, and that took me another few months. I finished it the night before Thanksgiving that year.
And I know you said you shared with your family.
I read it to them after our Thanksgiving meal. I read them the fourth one, the Hogarth's Return.
And how did they respond?
They liked it. Of course, my mom and dad and brother, they're going to like it. But I think they actually did like it, sincerely as well.
I couldn't help but like the series. So I feel like on one level, the fact that it's written in verse is evoking this sort of like childlike play, that coupled with the illustration from Chris. And then this sort of deeper level of wisdom that plays out through some of the psychological stuff and the details that have all different kinds of historical play. Just drew me in, right? And I feel like I want to find some friends for Hogarth. I want to find some friends for him. So, but in the meantime, I want to turn it over to Chris for a little bit, because I think that the partnership between the two of you is such an important part of this story. Mm-hmm. And Chris, I'd love for you to share, how you came upon this project and your background and why this really appealed to you.
Yeah. Well, Jim and I have a mutual friend, Laura Coburn. I work at Coburn Design in Auburn, so I work with Laura, and Jim had known her outside of that. And I think Jim met her at some event and mentioned to her that he was working on these stories and that he, wanted them illustrated, had worked with an illustrator, but things weren't working out. So she mentioned, I work with someone who happens to be an illustrator. I went to school for illustration, SUNY Fredonia. And then I went to grad school up at Oswego for graphic design. So that's my background as far as that. So Laura hooked Jim and I up, and we sat down and had a couple preliminary meetings. He shared with me the manuscripts, and I got to read them, and I was immediately drawn into them. The sense of humor that they have, the dark, macabre kind of tinge that they have really, was attracted to me. So I've kind of grown up with Tim Burton in my life, the movies. Edward Gorey has always been sort of something I've been a fan of. So when I started to mention these things to Jim, he's like, that's exactly what I was thinking. So that's where we started to sort of develop the look of Hogarth. Initially, it was sort of a little darker, a little edgier, and, we would sit down at some lunch meetings and kind of hash out some ideas. But then we had a sort of a brainstorm where we said, why don't we sort of juxtapose the sort of dark underlying tones from the story with some lighter, more colorful, almost childlike illustrations, or something you would see in a children's illustrated book. So that's kind of where the look evolved from. And I think our process has been really great, our partnership, our process, because generally what we'll do is Jim will hand over a bunch of notes that he's kind of written up for me as far as, what he sort of envisions some of the illustrations looking like. And then he'll hand it over to me, and I will just start sketching, pencil and paper, and we were talking about inspiration,
it's
whatever
incredible.
Sort of. When it hits me, I've always kind of got a sketchbook or a piece of scrap paper, and I'll just start jotting down some sketches, and then a lot of time, thank goodness for technology, I can email them to Jim and say, hey, what about these for, the stanza? And he can get right back to me and say, I love it, or, I was thinking more this way or that way. Mm-hmm. And then once we sort of got a nice rough outline, that's when I bring it into the computer, because all the illustrations are done digitally. I mean, they have a look that's almost watercolor-y, kind of pastel-y maybe, but they are all digital. That's the method that I like to work in. So and it lends itself to the way we work as far as emailing and kind of printing out things to share with each other. So
it's really great. It's so intriguing, this partnership, because whenever you have, two people sort of giving birth to this work that comes from within, right? there, you have the perception that there could be some clash, and some banging of heads here. And if my memory serves me correctly, I think, Jim, you told me there was only one time that you actually said, no, I don't like that, and you wanted to do something different, right?
Right, and there wasn't it wasn't so much a clash of banging heads, but because Hogarth, he builds a guillotine in the first book, and he starts dispatching the cats in the neighborhood, then the dogs, and it goes on. And at one point, Chris had, when we were working on the first book, there was this illustration, basically a sketch. There's the little guillotine, and Hogarth sort of leading a cat over to it. And I said, I don't want anything to appear in these that's that close to what's happening, because I don't want them. This isn't a gore fest. This isn't about the blood and all this. It's this thing to get the story going. And I was mentioning to you, I'm a big fan of Alfred Hitchcock movies, and Hitchcock. Sometimes the plots are a little far-fetched. I love them, but sometimes they're a little out there. But he said, I need something to get the story going. He called it his MacGuffin. And so I think in terms of, I use that term, I think about that, the MacGuffin. That's what the killing of the cats is. It's the MacGuffin in Hitchcockian terms of what is propelling this narrative line here. So my brother was some friends of his. After our first book came out, some friends that he runs with, he was telling them about this, and a couple of the girls in the group said, "Oh, that's awful! I love cats." And my brother said, "It's not about the cats."
Right, you have to get past that.
Yeah. Other than having an allergy to cats, I have no real animosity to them. Right. Although we did have a letter writer in the local paper one time thought we were like sadistic and kind of crazy that we were, writing a book about killing cats. But it's not about that. Right,
absolutely. And actually, anyone who's watching this who knows me at all, you talk about a cat and a guillotine in the same sentence, and you'd be like, why are you sharing this right now? But I'm telling you, the humor is just so engaging. So anyone out there watching, if you've listened to some of the influences that these guys have had, get out there and check out the website and go buy these books. They're fantastic. What is the website again? It's
www.thehogarth, Hogarth, Saga, Saga.com. That's all one, long run together word.
Okay, excellent. So guys, you've shared a couple of your influences so far, but if you'd both comment a little bit more on a couple other influences in your life in terms of the work that you do, I would love it, and I think our viewers would love that too. Yeah,
I mean, I know that Jim and I often at our lunch meetings, we'll start out by just kind of talking small talk about what TV shows we're watching, what movies we've seen lately, and we have such similar interests that it's always that takes up half the lunch meeting right there, just talking about the newest episode of whatever, Walking Dead or whatever we're watching. But a lot of films have been an inspiration to me as far as the illustrations. I'm a child of the 80s. I spent a lot of my formative years in the 80s watching movies and TV shows, so a lot of that kind of comes through. We tend to both sort of like horror movies and sci-fi movies, so a lot of that kind of may not be overtly influencing the Hogarth Saga, but there's definitely inspiration drawn from that. And I know, Jim, your background in literature and philosophy.
Right. It's like, that's part of it, but it's not so much the formal academic. I have an MA in English too, but it's not so much the formal academic background as just things that I've been drawn to throughout my life in terms of I'm interested in reading or watching. I've always loved Halloween, and this is a very Halloween-esque. I'll tell you this brief story. It's not so much about influences, but a friend of mine, he gave the manuscripts to someone, and who has these series of books that are published and I guess do pretty well. and I won't use any names, but she didn't like it, and she sent me a letter. 'Cause all I wanted to know was if she knew what, and I wasn't looking for a critique, I just was wondering if she knew of any agents who might be interested in this. But she gave me a critique, that's what she thought I was looking for. And she said, I don't know who would like this. She said, maybe a bunch of Halloween gatherers. So that's why on our Kickstarter, page, we titled one of our films "Hogarth Halloween Gatherers," because I love Halloween.
Yeah.
And I love this kind of spooky stuff. Some of the allusions that are in there, they're along with the French Revolution, Napoleonic history, and I got kind of tired of that. So by the time of the fourth book, there's only one allusion to Napoleonic history. And to get it, you have to know a little bit Napoleonic history, and you have to know a little French. But all of these allusions, the little Easter eggs, you don't need to know. You don't need to catch any of them to get the story. I hate books that are like that, but I just like them as little pleasurable things. But there are things that I've had in mind. Say the conversion of St. Paul. The scales fell from mine eyes. Augustinian notion of sin, references to the French artist Henri Rousseau, pop culture, the American Psycho. There's a little.
I love it.
I mean,
yeah.
And I don't even want to say what all of them are, because I'd rather if people read them that they kind of
figure it out.
Yeah,
right.
It's
absolutely
more fun for them, I think.
And I think the diversity and how eclectic it is, and the fact that there are things in there that people can pick up on, but they don't have to in order to get the story. This is part of why I think this series can meet such a diverse audience, right? Because it's just, the humor is engaging. Guys, if you're out there and you're watching, go to the website, check out these books. I was thinking, how wonderful would it be for this whole collection to be one book club around Halloween time, right? That would be great. But in terms of a call to action, I just want to share with you, we are looking for some friends for Hogarth, so if you're out there and you have any literary contacts or you have any idea on how we could spread the word, I would love to hear from you. Find me on Facebook, send me a private message, or find these guys or go to their website. But start with the books, right? They're a great read. They're quick and easy. And I have a feeling if you stay tuned, you may see these guys on a show here down the road, and perhaps even at an event where you could meet the authors. So really quick, we're going to wrap up today. Thank you so much, guys, for coming into the studio. Again, this episode was people who are living their passion through their platform. And I just have to do a couple of credits out and about in the community. This past week, I've been living at the Peace House, house sitting for some friends, but the Peace House is actually available on Airbnb if you want to check it out here in Seneca Falls. So if you've got any excursions in the Finger Lakes, go ahead and check it out. Also had a couple of events at Yoga on Geneva Street in Geneva, New York. So if you find them on Facebook and like them, you'll stay in touch for future events as well. And finally, the newest issue of Finger Lakes Woman is out, just came out hot off the press from Philadelphia today. And so that's a summer edition. It's got a great calendar of events, so you can stay tuned on what's going on in the Finger Lakes. And to leave you with some ideas and inspiration, here's what I want to ask you. These guys, their partnership, the work that they've produced, what stories are inside of you that haven't been told, right? And what dreams are inside of you that you'd like to pursue? And if you'd like help answering any of those questions, please feel free to reach out to me on Facebook. Send me a private message. I'm starting a community where we're going to be sharing live videos and webinars to help you unleash that creative process. So thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful July.
One